slides. So welcome and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone tuning in from all over the globe. Thank you for joining us for the fourth and final webinar in the series, Scientific Publishing for Field Epidemiologists, brought to you by TEPHINET and WPSAR, the Western Pacific Surveillance and Response Journal. World Field Epi Day was created as a global movement to recognize and raise awareness of the vital role of field epidemiologists in protecting population health. Today's webinar is on being a good peer reviewer. We're going to be picking up right where we left off last week, which is where we talked about responding to peer review. The webinar will discuss how to interact with journals around the topic of peer review, how to critically review an article and write up a review, and the benefits of being a peer reviewer. The purpose of this webinar is to provide insights on the peer review process for you as an author and to encourage you to become a peer reviewer. If you follow the Lancet or any of those other large publishing groups, you might have noticed that last week was International Peer Review Week. So this is very timely topic. Today, we're going to try to keep the session brief to around 30 minutes so we can avoid the infamous Zoom fatigue that's been everywhere this past year and a half. You can ask questions throughout the talk, either using either the chat function or the Q&A function. And for those of you who haven't joined us in the webinar series before, I'd like to start by just reintroducing the presenters for our series. My name is Elena Atkinson, and I'm a project coordinator with TEPHINET. I support knowledge exchange, community learning, scientific communication, and conference activities. And next we have Ashley Arashiro, who is WPSAR's, who is one of the coordinating editors for WPSAR. She manages the peer review and technical editing process and the progress of manuscripts from submission to publication. Her background is in technical writing and public health. And then finally we have Michelle McPherson, who is the co-editor for WPSAR. She's a graduate and previous staff member of the Australian Field Epidemiology training program and has worked with many FETPs in the Western Pacific region in her role with WPSAR and has attended TEPHINET conferences as a participant and workshop facilitator. So Michelle and Ashley will be answering questions in the chat today. So if you have a question during the presentation, go ahead and type it in the Q&A or in the chat, and then we'll answer as we go. And then
Elena,
at the end, yeah.
Elena, sorry to interrupt. We've just lost your screen sharing.
Oh, so let me get that back.
Yeah.
All right, let me get this sharing back, and then we'll get started. Let me know if that looks good.
It's just in the wrong format. We can see.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out. Because when I present, okay, stop sharing. Start sharing. I share the other screen. And then present, yeah, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So yes, this is the three of us, as mentioned before. And let's get started. So the first question is that we'd like to answer is really just what is peer review? And it's the process of subjecting an author's scholarly work, research, or ideas to critical review by experts in the same field. And it serves two purposes. One is as a filter, so that only high quality research gets published, and two, to improve the quality of manuscripts before they get published. So peer reviewers provide suggestions to authors to improve the quality of the work and also identify any errors that need correcting before publication. And who can be a peer reviewer? That's the next question. Really, the only requirement is that you need one published article in the field or some relevant experience. That's it. We like to mention that it's peer review, not expert review. A lot of times we think that a peer has to be somebody with years and years of experience, but it's just somebody who is more or less at your same level in your field. So while somebody might have a published article or experience, that doesn't mean that they're going to be a good peer reviewer, though. That just means that they can be a peer reviewer. So what we would like to encourage you today is to learn how to be a good peer reviewer. And you're in this talk already, you have an interest in becoming a peer reviewer or improving your peer reviewing skills. So if you're still questioning why you would want to become a peer reviewer, there are numerous benefits. Number one, you stay up to date on the latest work in applied epidemiology. You get to see articles before they even go public. So you get that kind of like behind the scenes tour. You also gain valuable professional development experience. You learn how to edit your own work because you start editing others. You can also recognize patterns of what makes a successful and impactful article. Like we said, behind the scenes, you can see the methodologies of what gets published and what doesn't. You can also shape your field of science by deciding what gets shared and what doesn't. And then the last two have to do with you receiving recognition. So you can get recognition, for example, through Publons, which is a website for showing off your peer reviews, or on the journal website. Sometimes they'll publish the names of their peer reviewers. And then you can also add peer reviewing to your CV. And the characteristics of peer reviewers is that most of them, if not all, are volunteers. They're very busy. They have just as busy schedules as you do. You're working hard in the field, in academia, you've got your regular life. So they're very busy. And then at least over half of peer reviewers have never received any formal training on how to review. So they're busy, not formally trained, and volunteers. So this makes it very hard for very hard for editors to find good peer reviewers. And there was a survey of journal editors, and about 75% of them said that finding peer reviewers is the hardest part of their job. So we're really glad to have you today and to hear that you're interested in maybe being part of the peer review process. So how do journals peer reviewers? First, use their own pool of authors or reviewers. Those are people that have published before or reviewed before. They keep up their pool of contacts. They might use authors who have published before, either in that journal or a similar journal. They might just use personal networks of colleagues. They might send out emails to people that they know, asking them, if they know of anybody who might be a suitable reviewer. They could also perform PubMed searches for similar papers. And then they might also ask the authors for suggestions. Although this doesn't mean that if they ask you for a suggestion and you give a suggestion that reviewer will go, direct to review your paper. It's just a contact that they would like to include in their pool. And then they can also ask their associate editors for reviewers from their own experience. So there's a lot of ways that peer reviewers can be found by these journal editors. But also, if you would like to proactively sign up, you can definitely do that. What you would do, the logistics of doing so, is you would first register on a journal platform, or if you published an article with a certain journal, you might just be registered automatically. Then all you have to do is keep an eye out for peer review invitations in your email inbox. You'll usually get one every few months. They usually don't like to give you so much work to do. They don't want you to get tired of peer reviewing, so they'll usually keep it to once every few months. Once you do get an invitation, start by verifying the deadline. It's very important that you make a note of this. You can ask for an extension if necessary, but it's very important that you keep an eye on the deadline, even if you're going to ask for an extension. Then you should verify the topic area, make sure that it is aligned with what you study in your area of expertise, and then also verify any conflicts of interest. Maybe you studied with that person, or maybe they're working on a technology that's similar to an area that you work in. So just make sure there's no conflicts of interest. If those all check out, then read the journal reviewer guidelines and the journal's scope or mission. And then you can sign into your account on the journal platform to either review the paper and either accept or reject the review. Ashley or Michelle, do you want to explain the WPSAR profile, the platform?
Certainly. So this screenshot shows how you can register with the WPSAR journal. And here you can actually register to be a reviewer or a subscriber. So basically you come into our website, and we can share that URL in a minute. put in your contact details, and if you're interested in being a reviewer, you just tick that second box down the bottom. Yes, I would like to be contacted with requests to review submissions to the journal. And we would encourage all of you to sign up to become a reviewer with WPSAR, because being in field epidemiology, you are definitely qualified in the areas that we publish in. And just to reiterate what Elena said, yes, finding peer reviewers is one of the hardest parts of our job. So the more people we have on our bank, the easier that becomes for us. So we do encourage you to sign up to WPSAR. Thanks, Elena.
And just a quick addition to that, when you sign up to be a reviewer with WPSAR, once you get into your profile, there's a place where you can also add your areas of expertise. And especially if you want to get peer reviews from us, that's going to be key in us knowing who to assign which papers to based on what your specialties are. When we search for reviewers in our database, then we will type in keywords and such as surveillance or COVID-19 or whatever subject the paper that we're looking to put forth for peer review is about. And so if you make sure that you're adding those keywords or your areas of expertise to your profile when you register with a journal, so that the editors know what kind of papers to assign to you. Otherwise, you might not get anything.
Great, thank you for that. So assuming that you signed on to the journal platform, either WPSAR's or any other journal platform, and you've got your first invitation to review an article, imagining you sign in, you've accepted it, there's no conflicts of interest, your topic areas align, how do you actually go about conducting a review? So we recommend reading through the article several times, each time focusing on a separate category of issues. So first, just read through the entire article to get a general overview. Just read through it as if you would read a normal article. Then go read the journal's requirements for that type of article, word count, sections, how many tables, all of that. Then go back and read the article again and mark or annotate any specific issues. Once you've written down all these issues, you can categorize them into major issues or minor issues. Once you have that division, also go back and review any relevant literature cited or literature that has not been cited. And then identify any ethical or confidential issues that you might have to tell the editors, and then write up the report. Just to remember, when you're writing up your report, you're going to be writing this for both the authors and the editors. So we're going to go over a little bit more how to do that. So we mentioned major changes and minor changes. We wanted to just make a quick explanation of what these differences are. Major changes are changes required to the manuscript's content. And these are things that are fundamental for the current study. So it's something that is major that absolutely has to be changed before this manuscript is published. It's not helpful to recommend additional work that could be, the next step. Like, why didn't you include this other extra variable? Maybe that variable will be included in future work, but it wasn't included in this current one. So just make sure you're sticking to what really needs to change for this current study. And then you can also have any number of minor issues, and minor changes will improve the manuscript, but they don't affect the overall content. So for example, if they left out a reference, that could be something minor, unless it was a really important paper in your field and they just missed it completely. That could be a major issue. But normally if you miss a reference or two, that's minor. Technical clarifications, maybe that you just need a little bit more clarity on how a specific procedure was done, but there's nothing fundamental that will change the article. And then also anything with data presentation could just be a minor issue. So maybe present the p-values differently or round the numbers differently. Those aren't going to they're not going to affect the overall content, but they will be important for improving the quality, but it's not fundamental to the study. So as you go about peer reviewing, remember that your role is to critique on the appropriateness of the study and its design. It's not really about your personal preferences, and you're also not an editor. So Your role is to critique, for example, the appropriateness of the study design. So if they did a cross-sectional study or if they did a cohort study, is that appropriate for answering the objectives? Also on the clarity and completeness of the information. If you didn't understand a section, it's totally fine for you to ask for more clarity and more information. Also the completeness of the literature review, definitely critique that. Mention if you think they missed out on any important authors that they might have overlooked. And then also in the appropriateness of the conclusions. A lot of times we'll see this like an outbreak investigation in a small village in one part of the world, and then we'll jump to these conclusions about how everybody in the whole world should do something when it was just a small scale study. So make sure that the conclusions that they're drawing are appropriate to the size of their investigation. But then your role is not to critique specific grammar. So don't go in sentence by sentence and editing every word or every typo. That's not your role. What you can say instead is just this article should be edited professionally. And that's it. Also with formatting, you don't have to say, oh, this font size should be different, or this table should be smaller. Just say this article should be formatted per the journal guidelines before publication. That's it. You don't have to go in and edit everything. And then also preferences. Don't critique things that you would have done differently. For example, if you know that the graph has a green color, don't say I would have used blue. That's just a preference. And not all of us can do the studies the same way that you would have wanted one. But as long as you're focusing on if the study was appropriate, the conclusions are appropriate, information is clear and complete, that's as far as your role needs to go. So Ashley and Michelle, do you want to explain how WPSAR approaches the peer review by giving the questions?
Ashley, do you want to take us through this slide, since this is the part of the journal process you mostly do?
Sure. All right. So with WPSAR in particular, we send a particular form for peer review that guides you through what questions you need to answer while you're reading the article. And so it's not just you're creating your own Word document or you have a free text box to just structure your report however you choose. It'll start by asking you questions such as, was the topic of the report described sufficiently? And then you check yes, no, or not applicable. And then there's a free space for comments below that. And so depending on the type of article that you're reviewing, the questions will be a bit different. But in general, you'll ask, is the study design appropriate? Was everything described sufficiently? Are the results valid? Are the limitations discussed enough? Are the conclusions valid, and are recent and relevant references cited? And then beyond that, there will be a space for general comments and a space for specific comments, as well as your final evaluation of whether to accept the manuscript, decline, or recommend major or minor revisions.
Great, thank you so much. So this is what WPSAR provides, but not all journals will. So in general, this is the format that you should follow unless you have these specific questions. But in general, a peer review report will start with summarizing the paper as you understood it. So no judgment, just describing how you understood it. So for example, this outbreak investigation was in response to an increase of disease X in region number 7. If you'll notice, we're not judging it. We're not saying this was a good outbreak investigation or bad. We're just saying how we understand it. And you might remember these examples from last week. Then provide the editors with a paragraph or an overview of your thoughts on the paper. So for example, you could share your thoughts on the study methodology. You could say, well, the study methodology is robust and well described. This article will need more detail in the results section to be worthy of publication. So if you notice, there's definitely a judgment there. You're saying the study methodology is good, but we need more detail in the results. So that's a judgment right there. And that would be a whole paragraph with your thoughts. Then the quote unquote meat of your review will be specific comments about the major revisions and the minor revisions. If you notice when we recommended you annotate them, you would list them out in a list, just literally 1, 2, 3, 4, with the major revisions that need to be changed and the minor revisions. And then finally, you have a space, you can write a paragraph with a private message to the editors, and you can voice any confidential issues you want to raise. For example, if you detected plagiarism, or you think that the authors did not receive appropriate ethical clearance, anything that you want to tell the editors that you don't want the authors to know, you can put that in a paragraph at the end. So this is what your peer review report will look like. And when you're writing, remember that you are actually writing for two audiences. You're writing for the authors and for the editors. So the authors need to know what was good about their paper and where improvements can be made. But then the editor needs to know if you think this manuscript is a publishable piece of work. So keep those both in mind. Tell the authors how they can improve, but also tell the editor if this is publishable or not. So we recognize that this is a kind of tricky line to walk. So we wanted to leave you with a few examples of good versus bad peer review comments and how you would say each of these topics in a way that's constructive and also lets the editors and the authors improve. So Ashley or Michelle, do you want to explain these ones?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Elena. And just to reiterate that, I mean, as you would appreciate if you're the author receiving peer review comments, it's often more encouraging to receive a positively written comment as opposed to a negatively written comment. And here we just provide a couple of examples of a more positive way to write a comment. So here the first bad example, and yes, we do see peer reviewer comments that look like this. So your methodology is out of date. I don't know why you are still using that technique, is quite a negative comment, but you could flip it and write something more along the lines of, to be aligned with current trends in the field, the authors should explore a different methodology if possible. So again, the same message is being presented. The methodology needs to be reviewed. But in the second example, you're actually sort of making that a bit more positive and providing a way for the authors to actually move ahead and implement that example. The second one, again, quite negatively, the bad example, you obviously have not read Johnson et al. Now, again, the authors may or may not have, and a nicer way to make that comment would be to suggest that the authors review the theory or the paper described by Johnson et al. And then decide for themselves if they want to include that in their paper, because this article may explain some of the phenomena they have observed. So again, just a more constructive way to encourage the authors to consider a new reference. The third one, again, Elena touched on this a little bit earlier, about sort of grammar and typos. So a bad example would be, the writing is so bad, it's practically unreadable. I could barely bring myself to finish it. Again, a nicer way to say that would be that while overall the study and the content is good, the language is unclear, so it made it difficult to follow. I advise the authors to work with a writing coach to improve the readability of the text. So again, constructive instructions on what the authors can do to improve their article. The final bad example we have, the study needed at least 1,000 more people for the control group. I don't know why the authors didn't do this. And this is a comment that we get a little bit with field epidemiology, as I touched upon last week's webinar, that sometimes in field epidemiology, we can't get the required sample size. Again, a nicer way to say this would be, the study may have benefited from a larger sample size, and the authors should either describe why there was a limitation on the number of participants. So again, not saying that they should just have more controls, but asking them to explain why perhaps they weren't able to get that sample size. Elena, are you happy to go through this, or should I keep going?
Sorry, trying to unmute and pushing every other button except for mute. Okay, yes, I can take over this one. So there are a few tricky situations that most peer reviewers will have to navigate sometime in their career as a peer reviewer. The first one is that the manuscript is fatally flawed. There's something that's so essential to the article that since they missed it, the article really can't be published as it is. So instead of saying, don't publish it, what we would suggest you say is something more like the authors have missed something crucial, and then you can explain what they missed. This also happens a lot. You just simply can't understand the manuscript. The language is so confusing, or there's errors that are making it hard for you to understand. You can just say the authors should clarify, or we mentioned earlier, the authors should work with an editor, or that the authors should work with a writing coach. You could definitely say something like this: the author should clarify the following sections to avoid confusion, but don't insult the authors, If the technical details don't make sense, you can always ask for them to be expanded and clarified. And then if the authors have over-interpreted their findings, you can state again the author's objectives and their aim, and then explain why the data does not fully support the conclusion. So just make sure that you're always writing with this tone of voice. A lot of times we give feedback, for example, at conferences or face-to-face, but remember, when you're writing these peer reviews, you're not sitting face-to-face. This is all going to be through an email, through a letter. So your words really will mean a lot more, and they'll have a lot more weight. So just make sure that you're using this kind of language. So once you've written up your report, what happens next? The editors will read through the review, combine all the reviewer comments, so it's probably you and another 2 reviewers or so. The editors will then determine the outcome of the review. If you remember from our previous webinar, these options are accept, revisions required, resubmit, or reject. And then they will communicate this review content for the authors for them to address. But since we all went to the webinar last week, hopefully, you will know how to navigate this process as well. And with that, we'd like to open the floor to any questions, and also invite you, while you're thinking about your question, to also get in touch with WPSAR or TEPHINET to read WPSAR's articles, submit a manuscript, or become a reviewer. It's all through the WPSAR website at ojs.wpro.who.int, or you can contact Michelle and Ashley at that email address there. And for TEPHINET, you can look us up on all social media platforms. Most of them we're either as TEPHINET or TEPHINET Secretariat. And then also, the first 3 videos in our series have been published already on the TEPHINET Secretariat YouTube channel. So you can see session 1, session 3, and this one will be uploaded very shortly. Did we get any comments so far? Let me see, Q&A.
I am seeing no questions.
Yeah, neither. Well, we've got 28 participants tonight. Do any of our 28 have any questions? Here we go. Can the writer reject my comments as a reviewer?
I suppose I can take
Yeah,
this one. Well, I suppose, yes, there is a possibility. I mean, I certainly will go through a set of reviewer comments and edit them for just to make them sound, if they sound a bit harsh, I will perhaps spruce up the language to make it a little less harsh while still retaining the same nuance of the comment. If multiple reviewers are saying the same thing, perhaps I'll delete one redundancy to make it so that the authors only have to address that comment once in their responses to the reviewers. As far as outright rejecting certain comments, I mean, we're not going to completely reject your review like as a whole, but certain comments, I mean, they may be edited or deleted if they're repetitive, but unless we completely disagree with a comment, then no, we generally don't.
And we discussed a little bit in the past webinar how authors of the manuscript can argue why that certain comment would not apply to their situation, or why they don't believe it would be appropriate to change the manuscript. So if they can argue that it would not be appropriate to make that change, they definitely can argue it. But I don't think you could straight out reject without some sort of justification or an explanation.
On occasion, just to add to that, I have put in little editor comments within the peer reviewer comments. Like, for example, if a reviewer suggests something that's I, as editor, believe is well and truly outside the scope of their article, I would keep the comment in, but just put in brackets, editor comment, this is outside the scope of the study, so don't feel you have to do this. Just to sort of give them the comment, but then also my opinion that, you know, they perhaps don't have to address it. But no, we always send the reviewer comments on. We just might provide a bit of extra context, as Ashley indicated. Great question, though.
Well, it looks like we're at time. Would you want to do one final explanation of how they can find WPSAR and sign up to be a peer reviewer?
Yep, I have just added so that you can copy it directly from the chat, both our email address and a link to our website. And again, just click on the website and follow the links to join in. And we would encourage all of you, now that you've listened to the series of webinars, or at least today's webinars, we would encourage you very much to join WPSAR as a reviewer. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank TEPHINET for putting together this webinar series. We have been delighted as WPSAR to be part of this series of 4 webinars, and we hope that it will encourage all of you listening to consider submitting your field epidemiology work to a relevant journal. If it's WPSAR, that's fantastic. If not, yeah, we do encourage you to publish your field epidemiology work. So again, thank you for joining. And thank you for inviting WPSAR to be part of this webinar series. Back to you, Elena.
Thank you. And once again, the webinar series, Michelle, do you want to share the link?
Yes.
So you can go back, everybody here can go back and revisit. Also make sure to share with your friends and colleagues. There we go. So it's a full playlist, so you can watch from start to finish. And likewise, we wanted to thank WPSAR and Ashley, and especially this evening, Ashley and Michelle, for stepping in. I got a little bit of sore throat, so thank you so much for them for helping me save my throat. And we wanted to thank all of our participants and wish you the best of luck on your publications. And of course, if you need any other additional help, feel free to reach out to us at TEPHINET on all of those social media channels that we shared. We also have a longer scientific writing course that you can look up on TEPHINET. We've got so many great resources, and we just want to see you have lots of success on your publications. So all the best to everyone. Let me